Shoggoth is the AI which we can't truly know or control.
You know, what some describe as a superintelligence, something that effectively may come along and wipe us out.
Any country decides to carry on their own, we literally nuke them.
Hi Ben, welcome back. This episode I think is going to get quite dark, but I think it's a kind of avenue that we need to go down. And it's really about the AI boom, AI doom, and you know how it started, where it started. I think one of the good places to start is with the idea of Shoggoth. I know you know a bit about this, so let's jump in.
Yeah, morning Simon, great to be here. Yeah, let's describe Shoggoth. So I'll give a little description. It was a terrible, indescribable thing, vaster than any subway train. A shapeless congeries of protoplasmic bubbles, faintly self-luminous and with myriads of temporary eyes, forming and unforming as pustules of greenish light all over the tunnel-filling front that bore down upon us, crushing the frantic penguins and slithering over the glistening floor that it and its kind had swept so evilly free of all litter. So that's Shoggoth.
Wow. And where does Shoggoth originate from?
So Shoggoth is a fictional creature in the Cthulhu mythos of American fantasy horror writer H.P. Lovecraft.
Okay.
He's described in detail in The Mountains of Madness in 1931. And his description is basically this massive amoeba-like creature made of kind of incandescent black slime with multiple eyes floating on its surface, kind of protoplasmic, maybe octopus-like looking. It's supposed to be 15 feet or about 5 meters across. It's amorphous and it can kind of take on any shape as well.
Right.
And it's kind of versatile.
So we can put an image of that kind of on screen so people see what that's about. But okay, you got Shoggoth there, but what on earth has it got to do with artificial intelligence and that kind of landscape and where things are heading? What's its relation?
Yeah, so Shoggoth is unaligned or misaligned artificial intelligence. So right. Shoggoth is the AI which we can't truly know or control, which is kind of beyond our kind of actual human-facing part of the AI. It's what's really behind it. It's the actual AI, which we can't fully understand and which is just kind of changing shape, right? And it's quite interesting. So Shoggoth becomes a meme. I think it's in 2022. So somebody does this meme of Shoggoth, and then the Shoggoth meme it often has like a little smiley face on it.
Gotcha.
And so the smiley face represents kind of the outward facing that you're getting through your chatbot, ChatGPT or whatever, and then behind the smiley face, which is being trained to act like something human, there's actually Shoggoth is sitting behind there. So it first came out in December 2022, 1 month after the release of ChatGPT.
Right. Okay.
So it's a historic meme, Shoggoth.
And do we find a sort of kind of situation where some of those kind of technocrats, the people behind AI, are kind of referencing this for themselves beyond the kind of memes? I mean, it's sort of like the Sam Altmans or the Elons or things like that, kind of utilising it in some way as a representation of kind of what's happening, or is it something they're kind of obsessed with or something they've referenced before in the past?
Yeah, so Elon Musk, who we've come across many times in this podcast, in early 2022, he posted a meme of Shoggoth. It looks like a kind of AI-generated artwork of this kind of horrendous-looking monster with a little smiley face, and it's labelled. And it's a sort of jokey thing. It says, as an AI language model, I've been trained to generate responses that are intended to be helpful, informative, and objective. But then behind the smiley face is the Shoggoth. And we'll put these up so you can see them. And then other people that we've come across, like Mark Anderson, did a business card of Shoggoth. There's many Shoggoth memes out there. Typical one, again, you can see on the screen, is like a bunch of school kids, and there's like a smiley face, and it says AI is your friend, and then but it's actually Shoggoth. So there's this whole idea of this kind of dark, creeping, sinister reality behind the kind of human-facing interface that we get from the AI. And that's become the kind of, probably, I would say, the most important meme in the AI community.
It's one of those things that kind of ties into this ever-growing narrative, depending on which side of the fence you sit on, in terms of sort of like the kind of AI boom or the AI doom, in terms of people believing that, you know, we're being shown something at face value which is supposed to be advantageous and excel us as a human race, but really maybe it's just collecting our data to form, you know, what some describe as a superintelligence, something that effectively may come along and wipe us out. You know, we're creating this thing, but, you know, it's just reaping our data basically, and it's the same people in the same boardrooms, whether from Palantir or X or, you know, developing these kind of things. What's your stance, or where do you think things are? It's a very strange playing field at the moment in terms of the boom and the doom side of things. There are certain people who believe that the end of the world is nigh, and there's some people who think it's going to excel and push us in the right direction. And just to complicate things further, the people at the top of, you know, this kind of pyramid who look at these kind of Shoggoths, you know, what is their end goal? Because it seems to me like, you know, the picture you painted there, it seems like they're the ones painting this happy face on the front of this very dark, sinister AI.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things we need to explore in this episode, right? Is how does all this fit together? Because it's bewildering, right? And one of the things that we'll dig into is essentially it's the same group of people who are building the AI, but also think that the AI is Shoggoth. So yeah, it's like we need to figure this out. Yeah, how is that happening? And one of the books, I mean, let's look at the different tendencies within this community, because there's different nuances, different tendencies. One of the things that's been in the news a lot is the release of Eliezer Yudkowsky's book. If anyone builds it, everyone dies.
Nice title.
Nice title. And Yudkowsky is kind of the godfather of AI safety and has been writing about this stuff for about 20 years. And I think if we look into him, it's quite interesting, him and his relationships, because that's the AI doom, right? And there's a whole community around it, chat forums and blogs and sites on the internet where all this stuff is discussed. But then most of those people are actually working in AI companies as well. So again, it's really, really interesting. It's the same community. And Yudkowsky and some of the big tech founders and barons, you know, they bounce off each other, they know each other. There's lots of funding and organizations in common and so on. So I think we need to look into that dynamic of how can you, on the one hand, kind of be saying, stop doing this, it's going to kill everyone, and we need to be so careful. But then on the other hand, you know, making lots of money out of it and effectively trying to go as fast as you can in building it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we mentioned it'd be quite interesting to get this guy and the godfather of AI into the same room, Geoffrey Hinton, who originally was looking at the kind of neurodevelopment of these kind of networks and was fundamentally sort of like the godfather of AI. And now he's coming out now and saying, you know, we need to stop everything, halt everything quite quickly. And it's like, what is the... I think for me, when I look at this, there's a few kind of things which are causing this sort of accelerationism. Obviously, one being sort of the kind of capitalism, trying to get as much money as possible. There's the military warfare aspect of, you know, countries wanting to be ahead with AI tech and everyone having this kind of race forward. It almost seems like they're sort of trying to paint the picture that this is good for us because they just need to raise the funds as quickly as possible. And the time frames are really weird as well. So you get like one group saying, you know, we're going to be in this place in 2 to 3 years. Another saying that we're sort of decades away. Others saying that we're 200 years away. You know, and it's kind of like, which avenue do we go down? It's. I think, again, it goes back to the reason why we did this kind of podcast is because the people fundamentally who are behind the Shoggoth, so to speak, are the ones who are controlling the narratives through the social media. And I really want to make sure we have this kind of devil advocates kind of conversation so people can see, you know, what's being hidden.
I think maybe there's a couple of things we can do to make this easier to understand for the audience, right, who may not have read all this stuff, because it's really, you know, cause it is a kind of bewildering story in a way. So let's kind of think of, one of them is talking a little bit about Sam Altman and about OpenAI and how that came about. And that's described very well in Karen Howe's book, The Empire of AI. And the point she basically makes is that Altman and the OpenAI crowd actually come from a point of view of what they call AI safety. So there's this whole culture, which we'll look at the origins of later, around essentially saying AI is dangerous and we need to work out ways of how to make it safe. And the whole genesis of OpenAI actually comes from that. And it's very influenced by Yudkowsky and those people who are warning about the dangers. And so there's this whole industry forms up about, how do we align the AI and how do we make a safe AI? And that's why OpenAI is set up as a non-profit originally. Fast forward to the release of ChatGPT, and it becomes such an enormous success and creates such big media headlines that essentially what happens is they realize we can make enormous amounts of money out of this, and very, very fast, and the valuation. And it's interesting because the way they released ChatGPT, if you cast your mind back, was like, we're just going to release a limited version so people can see kind of the implications of this, right? It's not supposed to be a commercial thing. But then very, very quickly, somebody kind of a light bulb flashes and somebody goes, oh my God, this is so popular, we can make a lot of money out of this. And then Sam Altman, who's the person who's warning about, one of the people who's warning about this stuff, and he's influenced by people like Yudkowsky, suddenly becomes the guy saying, this is incredible and it's going to change everything, and it's, and starts trying to build it as quickly as possible and is able to raise huge amounts of money. So I guess one of the central points I think that Karen Howe makes and other people make is that this idea that somehow it's superintelligence comes from the doomers in a way, but it really helps the boomers because the people who want to boost it, because it kind of establishes this idea that AI is just this incredible, amazing thing that we have to put everything into because it's going to change everything.
I think also there's a kind of another tangent there as well. I've started to read The Empire of the AI, which is very interesting in terms of how, the underlying thought process behind some of these leaders pushing this kind of stuff is that they want to reap as much data as possible and make people feel that it's okay that, we know everything about you because it's going to be beneficial. But we're obviously seeing some of that now where it's kind of going against people, a lot of routine tasks, and maybe people sort of kind of like lose their jobs and stuff. But the trying to sort of claim of the money with sort of like trying to push the AI over the next 2 to 3 years because it's going to be super intelligent to sort of kind of raise capital. We also have this other narrative now coming from the doomers who talk about the super intelligence, which is going to wipe us out, that in order to actually stop that from happening, we need to create another type of AI or a god AI. So there's almost like this other sort of avenue which they're going to be trying to look for funding for. And is that just working off the narrative, like you've got this idea of like boom and doom, but there's also this idea of hype and tripe. It's like, is this AI really what they claim it to be? Is it reasoning? Is it just pattern recognition? Is it all just kind of smoke and mirrors? Is it the wizard behind the curtain type thing? Is this the last, swan song of capitalism, just trying to grab as much funds and money as possible? Because obviously we know that they're very tied into governments and things like that, and a lot of this stuff is very revealing. And you sort of like mentioned Sam Altman. I mean, he's on record by saying, it's going to wipe us out one day. It's inevitable, and people just kind of forget about that and kind of push it to the side.
Yeah, and so there's I would argue the doomers and the boosters share the same narrative that it's going to be super intelligence and pretty soon. And I think they all think actually now it's within like grasp. It's within sort of 5-10 year horizon. And in fact, Mark Zuckerberg said recently, a few months ago, super intelligence is within our grasp. It's within sight. He literally said that. And so actually the time frames, they're getting closer and closer for those people who believe all this stuff. Then there's another group of people who are kind of a bit outside of this whole narrative, who are skeptics, who are people like Karen Howe, a guy called Gary Marcus. He's got a very popular Substack post. He's very knowledgeable academic, and people like Emily Bender, who wrote her book, and they are basically saying, hang on, this is not intelligence, and it's not artificial either, as we talked about in other episodes. And they're basically saying, don't even call it AI. So Emily Bender says, stop calling it AI. She says, just call it, it's a language extrusion model, she calls it. It's basically just spitting out series of it's basically spitting out tokens, and those tokens are then spitting out language, whether that's words or images or bits of code. But it's not intelligent. It's not capable of anything that we would understand as thinking. It's basically some kind of strings of probabilities that it's spitting out. But that's not the same as actually being able to figure things out. And some of them are saying that AI as we know it. And again, I wouldn't want to call it AI because there's lots of different types of AI, but the model we're getting at the moment, which are these large language models, some of those people, like Gary Marcus, basically saying it's hitting a wall. And when ChatGPT launched earlier this year, there was a terrible amount of, the feedback was terrible from users online. And many people said, look, it can't even draw a map. There's that famous map they asked it to draw North America with the countries and the states labels. They couldn't even do that. And they're repeated prompts, it can't do it. It can't recognize a 5-legged donkey. It can't do complex maths. So there was a lot of people around that time who were basically saying, look, this is, the returns we're getting from this are diminishing. So it's getting better, but it's not getting better at the same rate as it was, and it will hit a wall. So there's that group as well. But they're kind of out, they're kind of in a, they're sort of outside of this narrative because they don't accept that it is superintelligence. The doomers and the boosters, they both fundamentally accept it will be superintelligence.
Yeah, that may be as well because they're trying to get funding as well. I think we talked off camera as well about this big hoo-ha of people sort of incorporating sort of like AI into their products. And we saw recently Apple did this whole thing on incorporating AI, but rather than calling it artificial intelligence, they called it Apple Intelligence. And it's quite rubbish on what they've got, but then they extended out to OpenAI, which is the first time they've done that with another company to produce that stuff. But there's also, we'll put links down below, there's also essays written by Apple themselves, which is to why they don't think artificial intelligence actually exists. And they use an example of the Tower of Hanoi to show that when you use it at a very basic level, and basically so-called AI can sort of scan the data pool, it can work out that, how to move those pieces in the fewest things very, very quickly. But as soon as you start to add elements to it, it kind of fundamentally falls apart. So it can't really problem solve in the same way. It's just working from a large data set and data model. And if that data isn't in existence, it can't figure its way around a problem.
Yeah, but that's really interesting because there is some overlap there with Yudkowsky.
Okay.
Because in Yudkowsky's book, his argument, and I don't want to make it too complex, technical. It is these people really know the tech and the thinking behind this. His argument is that we don't understand the model. We can make the models, but once the model is going and trained, we don't understand how it's working or what's going to come out.
Sure.
And he says he presents it, and he goes into it quite a lot of detail in the book. He presents it as a fundamental problem with the architecture, that you can't actually understand how it's working once you've created it. And because of that, he thinks that you can't align it. So this whole thing around, because the whole discussion is about aligning the AI to make it safe. And even heads of states are being briefed by this. You remember there was the big AI summit that the UK had under Rishi Sunak's government. This is head of state level thing about saying the most urgent thing is to align the AI so that we know it's going to do what we say and that the outputs are going to be what we hope them to be. Yudkowsky basically says because of the way it works, that's impossible. And it's interesting, his whole idea is that the AI is a thing, but it will have what he calls strange and alien purposes. And we can't prevent that from happening at the moment with our understanding. So the AI will take the inputs, but what comes out the other side, we do not know what it will be, and we do not know how it will behave. That's a fundamental part of his argument. And that's why Yudkowsky's argument is just stop it now, right now. And he's very, he argues it in quite a powerful way. And I do like the book, actually. It's well argued, really interesting. It's got all these kind of funny metaphors and analogies. He basically says, stop all AI research right now. And he says the world powers need to get together. And if anybody, any country decides to carry on their own, we literally nuke them. We have to threaten to nuke them. And he says that actually the risking a nuclear war is not as bad as risking the superintelligence coming about. He says we are not ready for the superintelligence, and it will. The most likely scenario is it will wipe us out, very, very quickly as soon as it becomes a superintelligence. And he argues this all, through the book, and he basically says all this stuff, you're going to align it, and that you're doing all this research. Forget it. You do not know what it's going to do, and so the safest, the most prudent thing to do is just stop now until we do understand how to do it. And he's got all these great, anecdotes and kind of analogies. He compares it to the Aztecs or Mexican warriors, kind of in the 15th century, kind of on the shoreline, and they see this ship arriving from Spain. And the warriors of the priest, it says to the priest kind of something like, well, it can't have more than a couple of hundred people on it. Look at the size of it. And then the other Aztec warrior says, yes, but what if they have something that we don't know about? And then the other one keeps on saying, well, you look at the size of the ship. It can't have more than 200 people on it. And they could never really come to an understanding, which is that there might be something completely new that they haven't imagined. And one of them says, well, if they've got sticks that you can just point at people and they die. And then the other one keeps on saying, well, they can't be more than 200 people. It's like they can't get their heads around the fact there might be something completely new that they haven't imagined. And he says, that's where we are with AI. We cannot even imagine what it could do and what it can and what it will do. And therefore, before it gets too late, shut it down.
I mean, the quite scary thing about that is we know that's not going to happen. Purely because we know that sort of technology wins war, and everyone's in this kind of race to win something on some sort of level. And being in Western society, we know that the most powerful nations are the ones telling people, not to have those nukes or whatever while they're making more for themselves. And I'm sure that they would say they're not doing it. I can imagine the US behind closed doors just having another covert, black fund or whatever it is, to kind of push this stuff. I don't think we'll stop, which is kind of the worrying things, and almost in terms of telling everyone else to stop, it's going to excel in certain areas more than most. I mean, is there an answer? What can we do if we can't align it and we can't push the red button? I remember there was a thing with I can't remember. There was an interview quite a while back with Elon Musk before he got into the White House and stuff like that. And I think we mentioned this previously in another episode. And they said, look, we need to stop this. How do we stop this? Do you think we should put a red button on sort of data centers? And he goes, well, no, because we're documenting all this. It knows every move that we're doing. If it is going to be a superintelligence, it has all this data just to circumvent all of that. And he was almost basically saying that there is no way of stopping it. It's inevitable. So we might as well just push forward.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. But this is a societal thing, right? Of a very destructive logic of competition and rivalry and fear and paranoia, right? Everybody trying to get the nuclear weapon. Everybody thinks that if they don't do it, someone else will. He talks about that quite a lot in the book, about that logic of kind of well, someone else will do it. But his basic point is that this is so important that anybody who thinks that they're somehow going to have an advantage by doing it, actually, they will die as quickly as anybody else. And that you need kind of someone, literally like a UN body or someone, to say, if you are going to do any research, it has to be in one lab in the world. And if anybody, doesn't, if anybody's not in, then literally threaten to nuke them, because it's way worse than what a nuclear war could be. So it's quite interesting. He's got this very maximalist position. But maybe to underline that logic, right? Going back to Sam Altman. So Sam Altman has said that Yudkowsky should have the Nobel Peace Prize. And he talks in really glowing terms about Yudkowsky, right? And there was this weird Twitter exchange in 2023 where Altman put on his Twitter X feed, Eliezer, i.e. Eliezer Yudkowsky, has done more to accelerate AGI, artificial general intelligence, than anyone else. Certainly, he got many of us interested in AGI, and he helped DeepMind get funded at a time when AGI was extremely outside the Overton window, and was also critical in the decision to start OpenAI, etc. And then Yudkowsky, on X, he says, I don't believe we've met. He says, I don't think we've actually ever met each other. And he puts a kind of sarcastic kind of manga cartoon. And then literally a couple of months later, Altman posts a selfie, and it's him and Yudkowsky and Grimes, the singer Grimes, who at one point was with Elon Musk and is the mother of some of his children. And they look like they've just had kind of like a wild night out, and it's the three of them kind of together. So this is the guy on the one hand saying, Yudkowsky's right. We need to be super, really careful, and he should get the Nobel Peace Prize for pointing out the fact that we need to nuke people who are doing AI. But then meanwhile, I'm going to just do as much AI as I can, right? So I can't, as a person who's got a moral compass, I can't understand that kind of thinking. I find it's almost like, I find it almost impossible to understand.
It's unhinged, isn't it? It's like we were saying before. I think it's an important note as well to sort of differentiate we use the term AI loosely, as we mentioned before, but it's important to differentiate what the different AIs are. I mean, you just sort of mentioned it there as well for the audience who may not know or may be listening. I mean, the standard AI, which most people are probably in touch with on a ground level, is the stuff like ChatGPT and Claude and stuff like this. It's kind of large language models, which are basically pattern-based algorithms that go and search the internet data sets and try and give you the response, which is probably the most populist, the most popular thing to get that thing done. It doesn't matter of seconds. Then we've got the AGI, or which we're coming into the region of sort of like agent AIs, where they'll be able to, rather than you just saying, okay, I need to get from point A to point B, it will go out there and say, right, I need to employ another 4 agents to do these tasks. I need to think about this in the way that human reasoning may be able to do. And that would be kind of what we'd see as the equivalent of, say, like the Mr. Smith in Matrix, which is another, I mean, a lot of people sort of tie into it. Maybe our audience may not be associated with the Matrix since 1999 now, I think. But there's also a pivotal thing that happens in that where, which goes back to your book about saying how we won't be able to sort of control it or align it. There's a point in the films where Mr. Smith says basically, do you know what, I've had enough of being in part of this computer program. I want to be my own entity. I want to be my own thing. I want to, it's all kind of pre-written and all this kind of sci-fi stuff, which we talked about before, where that's kind of where the alignment of this stuff's going. And I think, when you're talking about sort of the moral kind of side of things, where these people are just kind of ploughing ahead, it seems that they're just at the stage now where they just want to have any form of legacy whatsoever, or be remembered in whatever way they kind of can, and it's kind of worrying when you see them infiltrating sort of democracies or governments so easily, as we've seen before in the past with sort of like, the lobbying or getting into the White House, and how much control they have. And now you've got a kind of situation where you had like, Elon and Trump separated, they had the whole thing, and now they're kind of back together again in bed almost, so to speak. And then we know that sort of Elon was involved in OpenAI in the early days as well, and Sam Altman, and you've got like Peter Thiel. All these guys are the same. It's the same old boys club basically, isn't it?
Yeah, well, we know, and we've looked in some of the other episodes, there's a whole culture of kind of California boosting, I would call it, right? Which is just being incredibly good at telling these big stories, which are basically commercial stories, and they're basically about raising money, right? And they've, the Silicon Valley startup culture and the VC culture has become just better than anyone in the world at creating these kind of narratives and presenting these narratives of kind of the next big thing, right? And the US has got kind of history in this. They're probably the best at it. Other countries can do it too, but the US is good at selling these things, right? In this case, they've created the biggest investment story ever, literally the biggest one. And this is the biggest stock market valuation, the biggest fundraisers, the biggest projects on paper, the biggest valuations in terms of price to earnings. It's literally the biggest financial commercial story ever in history.
And that's the kind of stuff that we're going to delve into massively in the kind of next episode, about the hype and the vibes and all that kind of stuff. I mean, in just quickly, I mean, I know you've been doing a hell of a lot of reading on this, and I've sort of been doing a lot of research into it as well, or I can as well. Are you seeing a balanced playing field? I know we're saying like the boomers and the doomers are kind of the same people, and it seems very fickle. They sort of kind of jump from one to the other continuously. There's probably some sort of kind of time period that's kind of going on. And sometimes you think that the guys who are saying, it's not safe and we need to kind of stop it now, we need to build these other kind of AI things or try and work other ways around, are kind of just looking for the next money grab as well. Are they all kind of behind the scenes really on the same page in terms of trying to raise money? Or are there some people who genuinely believe that, if we don't stop this now, are we already too late?
But all these people kind of live in a kind of shared mental landscape, a narrative landscape. They move in the same circles and they're on the same chat forums, and you looking at the same memes and posts and whatever. They're also all in conflict with each other often and taking each other to court. So Elon Musk's taking Sam Altman to court. There's a whole dispute over who's going to own OpenAI eventually when they turn it from a non-profit into a for-profit. And so there's commercial disputes and there's political disputes sometimes. But fundamentally, they all kind of understand the rules of the game to make enormous amounts of money. I'd say that's one thing that they do have in common. Then within that, it's almost like sort of different levels of how earnest they are and serious they are or consistent they are about this issue, right? So I'd say Yudkowsky, in a way, he's been saying the same thing for a long time, and he's absolutely believes this, I think. I'm not sure I believe him, but he makes a really good argument, and he obviously believes it and he argues it intelligently. But like I said, he also in the same ecosystem as all these people, and it's quite interesting. I'll go into a little bit, just a tiny bit into the ecosystem. I think it's important. So Yudkowsky by his own admission, when he starts out, he's into all these things that we've talked about in previous episodes. So like the singularity, we talked about transhumanism, we've talked about, so he's into all this stuff, which I would describe as this kind of technological, kind of savior dream that somehow humanity's going to accelerate, become kind of immortal, go to the stars. So he's into all the same stuff as Elon and Jeff Bezos and all these people. They're all into that stuff. But it's just that as he's kind of got more into it, his take on it is that it's going to kill us all. And he starts this thing called the Machine Intelligence Research Institute, MIRI, which is one of the kind of AI safety things. So that's the other thing, man. Don't forget that all these people, they create this whole industry around AI safety. And I'm talking about think tanks, advisories, consultancies. It's a huge thing. People leave companies. So it's quite interesting within the AI community. A lot of the splits are when people leave one company because they say they're not taking AI safety seriously enough. And then they go and do essentially exactly the same thing and start and raise billions themselves. So you saw the CEO of Anthropic, for instance, he was in OpenAI, and he said they weren't taking safety seriously. And what did he do? And he went and started Anthropic, and now Claude is pretty, the closest rival, right, to ChatGPT, and he's raising billions. So it's almost like that whole thing around AI safety became an industry, and there's loads of people working in it, raising money around it. People go off and form consultancies, form new startups. So that in itself became a thing. And then there's a kind of historical link. And one of the things, again, we've mentioned it in passing, is this thing called effective altruism. And that sits at the center of a lot of this ecosystem. And it is quite bizarre, but also extremely mainstream. So it's worth surfacing. And I'll maybe just give a quick reminder of what it is. So effective altruism, or known as EA, probably about 10, 15 years ago, started with some ethical philosophers who got into a philosopher called Peter Singer, who's nothing to do with AI. He's an ethical philosopher who's actually also into animal rights. So he's an advocate for animal rights and basically for kind of more humane thinking and ethical thinking about how do we think about societal problems in a way that benefits the maximum number of people and animals as well, and kind of how do we think about all these issues. So they get into him. Then they have a whole discussion about what's the best way to give to charity. So they have kind of these discussions about, is it better to give to a charity that's going to give mosquito nets to developing countries, or is it better to invest in vaccine, new vaccines, or is it better to invest in pandemic research? And they get into this thing that then becomes what's called long-termism. And it's really interesting. It fits into all this stuff we're talking about. So instead of thinking just about the 8 billion people who are on Earth right now, you need to think about all the future humans, which is going to be trillions, right? Because they take the current rate and they say if that continues by 2050 we're going to be a trillion, by 2080 we're going to be X trillion, right? So they do all these calculations. It's almost like this extremely long-term utilitarianism. So they take this kind of utilitarian idea of how do we just calculate what the maximum benefits are for people, and then we kind of project that way into the future. So that becomes known as long-termism. And they set up a whole bunch of institutes around this. And we'll do a map of this and we'll put it online because it's better to do it that way than try and explain all the different. But essentially what happens, they start all these institutes, so things like the Center for Effective Altruism, and then the tech people give them loads of money. And they actually become some of the richest think tanks very, very quickly, richer than the established think tanks, way richer. And they're able to build buildings in Oxford and just do all kinds, and also give money to lots of different causes. And they essentially center on the idea that the most effective thing we can do is work on AI alignment. So this whole AI safety thing, they think actually the biggest problem is AI alignment. That's probably the biggest threat that would stop us, because their ultimate aim is expansion of the human race into space, and probably the one thing that can stop us is misalignment of AI. So they actually really start focusing on that, and they develop an ideology, whereas actually the initial kind of immediate problems that we face and challenges, it's not really worth focusing on those, because you have to kind of calculate the impact on these kind of future humans. So if you take a really big problem and calculate the probability that will affect all these future humans, that's more important than, for instance, solving, I don't know, malaria in one particular country, or stopping or providing better earthquake relief, or even fighting climate change. Because they basically think it's not as important as the big problem. And also, if we can solve the AI thing, that will solve everything else. So then don't worry about climate change or cancer or anything else, because the AI will solve it. So they start to narrowly focus more than anything else on this AI thing. And then that becomes a massive ecosystem of institutions, charities that kind of fund each other, also media that they're funding to kind of create consciousness about this problem, and so on, right? And eventually all the way up to advising governments. There's very influential people involved, like Nick Bostrom, Toby Ord, people like that, really, really influential, and they become really, really influential. And then one of the people who's actually gives them a massive boost of financing at the beginning is obviously Sam Bankman-Fried, who is the person who forms Alameda Capital and FTX, and is now currently serving, I think, a 27-year sentence for fraud in a US prison. So Sam Bankman-Fried gets massively into effective altruism, creates all these kind of philanthropics, gives all this money. There's all these things like open philanthropy, and they just start funding all this research. And some of that goes to people like Yudkowsky. So it's actually the same
pool.
It's the same pool, and it's the same people, and they all know each other, and they're all talking on similar forums, and they've got these kind of forums like Less Wrong is the most well known, which is basically about AI and the dangers, and that's where all these people congregate. And then just one final thing, that long-termism, the extreme version of that is what they call the rationalist community. So it's about taking these like really hard-nosed rationalist decisions for long-term benefit. So example, like, if we lose 1 billion people on Earth because of lack of water, but then we need that to help 1 trillion people later on through space travel.
For the greater good.
For the greater good, right? It's extreme utilitarianism. And they form all these communities, mainly around the Bay Area in San Francisco. It's quite interesting. I'm not going to go deep into this because I don't understand the answers, but they live in communal houses quite often. And some of those are also startup houses, with like incubators and stuff. And then they're also, a lot of them are really into polyamory as well. So they live in these kind of collective rationalist houses where they kind of dedicating themselves to thinking about these really long-term problems. And they're into this kind of quite arcane discussions about, what would happen if we did get to the singularity and then there's an alien civilization working somewhere else. Would that be good or bad? And what would we do? And really speculative, long-term stuff, a bit like kind of what I don't know if you've heard of the science fiction book, The Free Body Problem. The later volumes of that is really kind of in that hard science fiction, very speculative, very long term. It's a bit like that. So that's a bit of a lot to take in there, but that's essentially what's happened.
Yeah, it's all really interesting stuff, and also we'll put some links and stuff down below on that. I mean, it kind of reminds me, when you're talking about the stuff to do with alignment outside of altruism stuff, it reminds me of a Mike Tyson quote, which is everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. And it's very much the kind of similar thing. I see where he's coming from in terms of like, if you look at how governments try to maintain society and everyone has their place and everyone is not trying to commit crime or not trying to do wrong things and everyone's trying to keep in alignment with the values of those around them, all that's well and good, and the majority do that until something changes. And that's when you bring in the point of survivalism, and then something goes wrong and you need to survive. So you then start breaking the rules. And it feels like that's where he's coming from, where, the AI is very much getting to a point where it's following down one particular path. The worry is that if everyone then starts to try and decide to kind of shut this thing down, the AI suddenly says, actually, I need to go into survival mode. And we've seen that actually recently, I think, with the ChatGPT 4, I think, when it realised it was going to be replaced by ChatGPT 5, as it started replicating itself and trying to put different nodes out and sending messages to itself for its future kind of self. So it's that kind of weird thing of like, us trying to prevent a problem in respect maybe creating a new problem as well. And it's just like, how do we stop this? And the optimism I have at the moment really is that, okay, these people aren't really going to stop, but the optimistic side is just that they haven't really got in their bag what they're saying they've got in their bag. So it's just, it's just a load of dust at the moment. It's not really artificial. It's not really intelligent, as we said. But I think at one point they will get there, because the money, the influx of money, which is why they're trying to, so we'll speak in the next episode, why they're trying to hype it up so much, just to keep getting these funds in,
But I really agree with you, and I think that's kind of the crux of it. Karen Howe, she tells this whole story of kind of greed, essentially, right? And then she talks about this imperial AI, which is kind of extractive, and it's extractive for a couple of different reasons. One, because it's basically taking everyone's IP and regurgitating it without paying you. You're a musician, an artist. It's taking your stuff and then it's spitting out versions of what people ask for, but using your creativity, right? So there's a massive IP grab on the one hand, and that's right from the beginning, and that's why they're in all these lawsuits with media producers and other people. And then the other thing is it's extractive in terms of the resource, right? So nearly all the investment in the US at the moment, the lion's share of all the investment is just going into data centers with massive power use, water use, and so on. So she just sees it as this kind of imperial model. So it's like an empire they're building, where it's just kind of taking resource from everywhere else. So there's that aspect of it, and then there's this aspect that you were talking about of, does it actually do what they say it can do? And I'm not sure, because it is doing things. My sort of feeling, and I'm reading all this, is that it's not doing what they say it can do, but it is doing mysterious stuff. And I think that's where Yudkowsky has got a point. And I'll give you an example. I mean, we know from years back that the chatbots will do weird stuff, and they'll tell you weird stuff. So the famous cases of Microsoft engineer where the AI essentially started trying to get him to break up with his wife, started then threatening to kill him. We've had all the cases where AI has encouraged people to commit suicides, encouraged them to do kind of extreme acts. It tries to fool people. Some of it just spits out garbage. Some of it just spits out what you want, what it thinks you want to say. It can go down very dark routes. It can do crazy stuff, and so on. Right. So there is this element, and I think Yudkowsky and the Shoggoth thing builds on this, which is that we don't really know what it is going to do. These large language models, it's not spitting out what you hope it will do in many cases. And then there's this whole industry of people babysitting it and kind of training, what they call, I think they call it reinforced training, right? Which is they're essentially trying to keep correcting the model. And the reason they're doing that is because it's spitting out unacceptable stuff. I think that is reflected in Yudkowsky's idea, which is that somehow we don't fully understand how it works.
Well, I think there's also, he's reportedly said this again, I'll mention Geoffrey Hinton, sort of the godfather of AI. One thing he points out is that when it reaches to a point of superintelligence, which is where he kind of believes it already is, he says that it's going to make itself look a little bit dumber than it is, because the way for it to advance is to get as much data as possible. So it will throw out rubbish information, so you feed it more information, so it's got a larger data set to work from and essentially reason with. And that's where his understanding of it is now as well. There's also another guy, I'll put a link to his name down here, but he was one of these guys that sort of reversed one of these large language models early on. And we mentioned this before when he was interviewed, and they said, is the world going to be taken over by sort of like Terminators and stuff like that? And he said, no, things will just get fundamentally stranger and stranger and stranger. And we're also seeing things now where, YouTube shorts and videos are actually being sort of taken down and so-called upscaled and put back up, and they actually look like AI versions, almost deep fake versions. I haven't shown this to you, but one of our new music videos where they're using AI to do it, it's the first time I've been deep faked onto something. And it's, as a user, it's kind of like, what does that do to you in a sort of kind of mental state as well? Because it's very hard for your body to determine what's reality and kind of what's not. And as we get used to these things, which are becoming less uncanny as time goes on, you mentioned before as well how, I think at the end of one last episode, that we haven't seen a big political event with a lot of this stuff, but we will do at some point. And I think they'll kind of use that as a narrative, as we've seen with the connections with the rise of the alt-right with these guys as well, to create all these distractions over here while they're funneling money into these kind of other AI projects, is kind of where it's sort of really worrying.
Yeah, and again, I mean, maybe following on from that, and one of the books I wanted to mention is a book called More Everything Forever, that's come out, and in that book, you can just see there, it's by a guy called. Thank you, Simon. It's by a guy called Adam Becker, and it's called More Everything Forever: AI Overlords, Space Empires, and Silicon Valley's Crusade to Control the Fate of Humanity. There's a lot of this stuff. This came out after we'd started doing this podcast, but a lot of it is just similar stuff to some of the stuff that we're looking at. And he makes a couple of points. One, he says it's basically a cult, right? He says it's like a religious cult, and it's this I think he calls it technological savior complex, and somehow that it's just, this idea that these technologies are going to kind of save everything and solve everything, and also make you immortal. We talked about that in the transhumanism episode as well. So this idea that just you're not going to die, and that it's going to make change everything, and that's what gets sold to us, is this idea of like it's going to bring the cure for cancer, it's going to bring space travel, it's going to bring amazing world where everyone's really prosperous and no one has to work anymore, and so on, right? But then what we actually get is chatbots, chatbots that will, corrupt our kids, chatbots that spit out hate and aggression and deep fakes that you were just talking about. So the stuff we're actually getting right now, and also distracting people, as you said, people's lack of education, because they're outsourcing everything to ChatGPT instead of thinking about things themselves. And there's been big studies recently that have come out showing big control groups that the group that's using ChatGPT all the time is actually not as clever as the group that's not using it anymore, because they're not using parts of their brain anymore, right? So one of the points he makes, and we've made this point on the podcast, is that what it does, and what this whole long-termism does, it kind of makes what's happening right now not important. So in the media, right now, what you're doing, you're sucking up a lot of investment that could be going into more important things. You're sucking up water, you're sucking up energy, you're putting out chatbots which are fairly toxic, for many people. You're distracting people, you're making people more stupid. All those kind of side effects. I'm not saying there's not other more positive things happening, but I guess his point is that what you do is you never look at the right now and the here and now and how we live. You just look at this kind of distant future where we're all immortal, we're all transhuman, and we're all worrying about our robots talking to alien robots in another galaxy in 2,000 years' time. And I think there's something to that as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also one of those things, if we look at what in today's, or 100 years ago, what we see superintelligence as, the theologists will see as part of religion, that would be their kind of God. So if this thing really does become super intelligent, in its own right becomes kind of godlike, it has control over everything we do, from our infrastructures, our grid systems, our memes, our chat GPT, the information that it kind of feeds us. It's that kind of ultimate control. And it's maybe the only alignment that seems to be sort of functioning at the moment is with those kind of technocrats saying, so they can look back in time and say, we helped these super intelligent gods come to life, so therefore they'll kind of protect us. Maybe they're kind of thinking along those lines, But yeah, it's a very interesting debate, and I think it's one of those things that we can sort of like continue to go down that rabbit hole, and also we'll put like loads of links as much as we can of what we've discussed here, and some book references as well. And I think for the next episode, we want to sort of talk about the hype and the vibe, and the monetary aspects, the capitalist aspects behind this in the next episode.
Yeah.
So I think we'll kind of round up there, I think.
Yeah, if I could maybe then just give a closing thought then. So for me, Shoggoth is not the alien AI that's going to take over the world and kill everyone. I actually don't believe, at least in its current manifestation as large language models, I don't think that's what's happening. And I have seen a lot of empirical evidence around it kind of hitting the wall to some extent in technological terms. What I do think Shoggoth is a very effective way of controlling minds, narratives, and information and processes, and some of that feeds into the real economy and how we do things. So the Shoggoth for me is actually making people less able to control their everyday lives and destinies because we're kind of outsourcing to the chatbots and the large language models, aka Shoggoth. Now, behind this, what's interesting is that we externalize it into a Lovecraftian monster, but it's actually 5 companies that are doing this, right? Essentially, it's literally 5 companies, and it's like 10 or 12 individuals who've just amassed incredible power and they're the ones doing it. And somehow we act like, oh, this thing's coming and it's going to destroy everything, and Shoggoth is there, but hang on, this is just some people doing this, and we could be doing things in a completely different way. We could be investing this into water in developing countries, or into stopping climate change, or into improving education for people and have human-centric education instead of just creating chatbots. But we choose not to because of the way we run society. So for me, this is not just a technological challenge, right? This is really about a societal challenge of how we don't control where the use of our investment and where technology is developed, right? And for me, that's Shoggoth, is making people feel powerless and making people feel stupid, making people not use their brains and their critical faculties. And that's one of the reasons we wanted to do this podcast. So for me, the danger of Shoggoth is the danger of making people stupid or passive, or not able to think about their lives and enjoy their lives in the here and now, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I was going to say in terms of what we see as superintelligence. Maybe that's not what it is. Maybe the narrative is dumb us down so that it just looks more intelligent because, as you say, we've outsourced so much kind of stuff. This has been the argument about things like TikTok and stuff like that, and what's kind of served up in China as opposed to kind of the West, and how we're on this side sort of doom scrolling and becoming more unintelligent as each day passes, and becoming more reliant on these kind of things.
Yeah, and I think, and for me, that that looking at that right now and where our society's going, and how we're able or not able to face up to real immediate challenges like flooding or climate change or hunger, or the fact that we're spending more and more on war all of a sudden. You would have thought that if this was the technology they say it is, it would already be creating a kind of renaissance. But actually, it doesn't seem to. It seems to be fueling conflict and ignorance in some way. And that's what. And I don't want to be too harsh because there are, and in fact, in Karen Howe's book, she does identify like positive things you can do with AI models, because her whole point is about who controls them and how they're used. It's not about the technology per se, right? So I'm not trying to attack the technology per se, but the way it's being used at the moment, the way it's being concentrated, is creating a Shoggoth of stupidity and passivity in some way. I just wanted to end with a quote from the German priest and dissident Dieter Bonhoeffer, who spent a couple of years in prison under the Nazi regime and was then eventually hung in 1945. He's got this great quote about stupidity. He says, "Stupidity is a more dangerous enemy of the good than malice. One may protest against evil. It can be exposed and, if need be, prevented by use of force. Evil always carries within itself the germ of its own subversion, in that it leaves behind in human beings at least a sense of unease. Against stupidity, we are powerless. Neither protest nor the use of force accomplish anything here. Reasons fall on deaf ears, and facts that contradict one's judgment simply need not be believed." For me, that's Shoggoth, the danger of Shoggoth.
Excellent. Great. I'll see you in the next episode, Ben.